The Galactic Council chamber was enormous, with thousands of seats arranged in circles that stretched up toward a domed ceiling made of transparent starlight glass. Representatives from hundreds of worlds sat watching, their alien forms creating a bizarre gallery of scales, fur, feathers, and mechanical parts. Some floated in special atmospheric bubbles, others stood on multiple legs, and a few existed as pure energy contained in crystal formations. At the center of this vast amphitheater, a raised platform held the newest member of the council, the Zathran Collective. Commander Crixvel stood 8 feet tall, his blue-gray skin covered in ceremonial scars that marked his victories. 4 muscular arms extended from his torso, each ending in hands with razor-sharp claws. His species had conquered 47 systems in the past century alone. Captain Day Kim of the human delegation stood perfectly still, his simple gray uniform a stark contrast to the elaborate displays of power surrounding him. Behind him, 2 other humans waited silently, a woman named Yoon Park who held a datapad, and a younger man called Jin Choi who kept one hand resting casually near his sidearm. The gathered aliens whispered among themselves in dozens of languages. Most had never seen humans before. To many they looked disappointingly ordinary. No claws, no armored shell, no impressive size. Just hairless bipeds with dull brown or black eyes. Crixvel raised all 4 arms for silence. When the chamber quieted, his voice boomed across the space. Fellow council members, we celebrate today not just our membership, but a demonstration of proper order. The aliens applauded with various appendages, claws clicking, tentacles slapping, and energy, beings pulsing with light. The humans, he spoke the word like it tasted bad, thought they could simply fly through our territory without paying tribute, without showing proper respect to their superiors. More cheers from the crowd. Someone in the upper galleries let out a war cry that sounded like metal scraping against stone. 2 Zathran warriors stepped forward, carrying ornate spears. The weapons were clearly ancient, their black metal shafts decorated with gold inlay that formed intricate patterns. The spearheads gleamed with fresh blood, the dark red of iron-based species, the blue-green of copper-based ones, and other colors that spoke of recent conquests. The communication arrays throughout the chamber hummed to life. Billions of beings across the galaxy would witness this moment. Holographic displays showed the scene broadcasting to every major world, every space station, every diplomatic embassy in civilized space. These spears have tasted the life of 17 different species who dared challenge the Zathran, Crixvel announced proudly. Today, they will be cleaned by human hands, so all may see the proper relationship between the strong and the weak, the E. Crowd erupted in laughter. Some species hooted, others buzzed or chirped their amusement. In the far sections, mechanical beings flashed lights in patterns that indicated hilarity. The sound was deafening. Crixvel stepped toward Captain Kim, all 4 arms moving in a complex gesture that was undoubtedly insulting in Zathran culture. He grabbed the spears from his warriors and thrust them toward the human captain. Clean. Them, he commanded. Show the galaxy how humans serve their betters. Perhaps afterward, we will discuss allowing you to continue existing in our space. Captain Kim stood motionless for several heartbeats. The silence stretched so long that some of the laughter began to die away. Then, without breaking eye contact, with Crixvel he reached out and accepted the blood-stained weapons. As his fingers closed around the spears, something changed in Captain Kim's expression. It wasn't anger or hatred. It was something much more unsettling, a small smile that barely curved the corners of his mouth, while his dark eyes remained completely cold, empty, like looking into deep space itself. The laughter faded completely, as every being in the chamber felt an inexplicable chill. Even the translation devices seemed to hesitate, processing not just words, but some underlying quality in the human's voice when he finally spoke. "That wasn't very diplomatic, Captain," Kim said, his words soft but somehow carrying clearly through the massive chamber. He began cleaning the spears with slow, methodical movements. "We'll be in touch." The broadcast cut to static so suddenly that many viewers thought their equipment had malfunctioned. In the council chamber, urgent whispers began spreading through the crowd as diplomatic protocols were quietly activated. Someone in the historical archives was frantically searching for information about human military capabilities. Captain Kim finished cleaning the last spear and set them both down with careful precision. Without another word, he turned and walked toward the exit, his two companions falling into step behind him. Their footsteps echoed in the now silent chamber. As the humans disappeared through the great doors, Crixvel stood holding his clean spears, trying to understand why victory felt so much like a terrible mistake. The archives of Veltar Prime held the memories of 1,000 civilizations, their stories preserved in crystalline databanks that hummed with ancient power. Deep beneath the planet's surface, in chambers carved from living rock, Scholar Velmog had spent 40 years reading the forgotten histories of the galaxy's past. His webbed fingers moved across the control surfaces as holographic displays showed battle records from centuries ago. The Veltar were one of the oldest spacefaring species, and their archives contained data that most civilizations had long lost or forgotten. For the past 3 days, Velmog had been searching for any mention of humans. Suddenly, the klaxons began wailing, the emergency signal that meant the council was being called into immediate session. Velmog's large eyes widened as he read what he'd just discovered. His hands trembled as he copied the data into a portable crystal. He rushed through the tunnels, his 6 legs carrying him as fast as they could toward the council chambers. Veltar pressed themselves against the stone walls to let him pass, recognizing the urgency in his movements. Some had heard about what happened in the Galactic Council chamber, but none understood what it truly meant. The emergency session was already underway when Velmog burst through the doors. The Zathran delegation sat at the center, with Crixvel lounging in his ceremonial throne. The alien commander looked pleased with himself, occasionally polishing one of his ceremonial spears, while other species offered their congratulations on his successful dominance display. "Council members," Velmog's voice cracked with age and fear. "You must listen to me, the humans. You don't understand what you've done." Laughter rippled through the chamber. Several aliens made dismissive gestures with their various appendages. A representative from the Sithkar Imperium chittered something that translated as, "The old scholar still lives in the past." Crixvel raised himself slightly in his throne, all 4 arms spreading in a gesture of casual superiority. "The hairless apes? They bowed like all the others. They cleaned my spears like obedient servants. Perhaps you should focus your research on more irrelevant topics, old one." "No," Velmog's voice broke completely. "You don't remember. 500 rotations ago, during the Great Cleansing Wars, there was a species recorded as human. They destroyed 17 star systems. They rendered entire civilizations extinct." He held up the data crystal with shaking hands. "The archives call them persistence hunters, who never give up their prey." A few of the older representatives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The Great Cleansing was barely remembered by most species, a dark time when entire sectors of space had gone silent, their inhabitants simply disappearing without trace. Crixvel let out a booming laugh. "Ancient fairy tales, myths to frighten children." Other Zathran joined in, their 4 arms clapping in a pattern that showed complete dismissal. Velmog activated the holographic projector in the center of the chamber. Ancient recordings flickered to life. Images that were fuzzy and broken but still clearly showed human vessels. They moved differently from modern ships, with a patience that was somehow terrifying. The recording showed human fleets following fleeing alien vessels across multiple star systems, never stopping, never resting, slowly but inevitably catching up to their prey. The chamber fell quiet as they watched the methodical destruction unfold. Human ships didn't use overwhelming force or grand displays of power. They simply never stopped hunting. They followed their targets through hyperspace jumps, around stellar obstacles, into asteroid fields and nebulae. One recording showed a chase that lasted for 3 standard years before the human fleet finally cornered its prey. Fabricated images. Crixvel waved all 4 arms dismissively, but his voice carried less certainty now. "Besides, look at this. Evidence of their submission." He activated the screens around the chamber, showing current data feeds from across Zathran space. The displays lit up with hundreds of reports. Human merchant vessels requesting docking permits at Zathran stations. Human trade delegations asking permission to conduct business. Human freighters peacefully waiting in designated shipping lanes. Human diplomatic couriers delivering formal requests for trade agreements. You see? Krixvel's confidence returned. They're already crawling back like beaten curs, begging for permission to enter our territory. My demonstration of power has brought them to heel. Velmog studied the data feeds more carefully. His ancient eyes could see patterns that younger species might miss. The humans weren't just requesting random permissions. They were systematically visiting every major Zathran installation. There, merchant vessels were taking unusually detailed scans of everything they encountered. Their trade delegations were asking very specific questions about Zathran industrial capabilities and defense systems. A terrible understanding crept over the old scholar, like ice water in his veins. He whispered, barely loud enough for others to hear, "They're mapping everything." The chamber erupted in dismissive laughter, but a few of the older, wiser representatives began calling up their own data files, checking for anything about human history. In the depths of space, human vessels continued their seemingly innocent activities, recording, measuring, and preparing for something that only one old Veltar scholar suspected was coming. The sprawling trade station orbited a brilliant blue star, its metal corridors filled with the sounds of 1,000 different species conducting business. In the main exhibition hall, Trade Minister Seo Huan stood before a gathering of wide-eyed alien merchants, her smile warm and genuine as she demonstrated humanity's latest technological achievements. Behind her, a power generator no larger than a dinner table hummed quietly, while its display showed that it could provide enough energy to light an entire city for centuries. On another table sat small vials of medicine that glowed with soft, internal light, each one capable of extending an alien's lifespan by hundreds of years. The most impressive display showed a weapon that looked deceptively simple, like a metal rod, with some attached crystals. The holographic demonstration above it showed how this device could crack planets' moons with precise, controlled blasts. Our industrial consortium is deeply grateful for the business relationships we've developed with your worlds, Minister Seo explained, her hands moving gracefully as she spoke. The translator device on her collar converted her words into dozens of different languages and communication methods, chemical signals for the insect-like species, color patterns for the beings who communicated through light, and subsonic vibrations for those who heard through their bones. The gathered merchants buzzed with excitement. A representative from the mineral-rich worlds of the Outer Rim calculated how much these technologies could be worth on his home markets. A trader from the gas giant colonies imagined the profits from selling lifespan extensions to aging politicians. Even the usually paranoid arms dealers from the war-torn sectors were impressed by what they saw. The raw materials you've provided have been most useful, Minister Seo continued, her pause barely noticeable. What she didn't mention was exactly how useful. The rare metals they'd received weren't being used just for peaceful technology. In hidden shipyards scattered across human space, these materials were being forged into weapons and starships the galaxy had never seen before. None of the alien. Merchants noticed the other humans in the room, a small group of people in simple engineering uniforms who stood quietly in the corners. While Minister Seo talked and the aliens calculated profits, these engineers were doing something far more important. Hidden scanners in their equipment measured everything. The energy output of the station's shields, the frequency patterns of secure communications, the layout of defensive systems, even the biological signatures of the various species present. Meanwhile, far across the galaxy, Krixvel stood on the command deck of his newest battle station. The massive structure floated in space like a metal moon, bristling with enough weapons to destroy a solar system. All around Zathran space, similar stations formed an impressive defensive network. Energy shields shimmered between them, creating barriers that could supposedly stop entire fleets. "Look at this magnificent display of Zathran power," he declared to his assembled generals, his four arms gesturing proudly at the holographic displays showing their defenses. "Our borders are now impenetrable. Let the humans come, let them try to challenge us. Our shields will hold for millennia." The generals, their own forearms crossed in traditional poses of agreement, nodded enthusiastically, some of them privately, wondered why the humans hadn't attacked yet, but none dared voice these doubts to their commander. What Crixvel and his generals didn't know was that humans hadn't forgotten about the incident. While they built their defenses and celebrated their strength, human merchant ships continued requesting docking permits. Human trade delegations kept asking for meetings. Human freighters waited patiently in the designated shipping zones, their captains always smiling and polite. But these weren't just traders and merchants. Hidden among the cargo containers were sophisticated scanning devices that recorded everything: patrol patterns, communication protocols, defensive system layouts, energy signatures. Every human ship that entered Zathran space carried military, engineers disguised as crew members. Each meeting with Zathran officials included specialists who memorized security procedures and defensive capabilities. In a quiet office aboard a human research station, a young woman named Yoon Park worked through the night. Her screens showed an incredible amount of information: detailed maps of every Zathran military installation, complete records of troop movements, shipping schedules for supply convoys, and even personal information about Zathran military leaders. Captain Kim appeared behind her, moving silently as he often did. He studied the displays with calm, dark eyes that revealed nothing of what he was thinking. "Almost ready," Yoon reported without looking away from her work. "Just need confirmation on the last moon-base location, the one they think is still secret." "Captain." Kim nodded slowly, watching as new data streams appeared on the screens. Zathran patrol routes updating in real time, defensive systems being catalogued, weaknesses being identified and stored. "Take your time," he replied, his voice as calm as it had been during the spear-cleaning incident. "We're in no hurry." But something in his tone suggested that when the humans finally were ready, their patience would end very quickly indeed. The three human ships drifted through space like lazy whales, their massive cargo holds making them look heavy and slow. Their hulls were painted in the dull colors that merchant vessels use throughout the galaxy, gray and brown, designed to be forgettable. To any observer, they appeared to be exactly what they seemed: slow cargo haulers, carrying goods between systems. From the command deck of his patrol cruiser, Drax Vel watched the human convoy through his view screen. The young Zathran was eager to prove himself after his father's recent diplomatic triumph. With forearms crossed in determination, he studied the fat human ships and smiled, showing rows of sharp teeth. "Perfect targets," he muttered to his bridge crew. "Father will be proud when I bring him these prizes." Behind the convoy, more Zathran ships moved into position. Attack wings of sleek fighters surrounded the humans, while heavy cruisers blocked their escape routes. In total, over 40 Zathran vessels had cornered 3 slow human cargo ships at the edge of neutral space, the perfect place for an ambush. Drax Vel activated his communications array, broadcasting on all frequencies. "Human vessels, this is Commander Drax Vel of the Zathran Third Fleet. Surrender immediately." His voice carried all the arrogance of youth and privilege. "You will learn the price of insulting the Zathran Collective." The human ships continued drifting forward, as if they hadn't heard. Their engines barely glowed. Their weapon systems showed no signs of activation. They looked like sitting ducks waiting to be killed. "Perhaps they don't understand the situation," one of Drax Vel's officers suggested, readying the weapons targeting systems. "Then we'll teach them," Drax Vel replied, raising one claw to give the attack order. That's when the lead human ship began to change. What everyone had assumed were cargo bay doors suddenly opened along its sides, but instead of containers or storage compartments, massive rail cannons emerged from the darkness within. The weapons were enormous, each one as large as a Zathran fighter craft. They spun up to power with a sound that traveled through space itself, a deep thrumming that the Zathran ships picked up on their scanners as vibrations in their hulls. "Hot in the—" Drax Vel began. The first salvo fired before he could finish. Streams of hypervelocity projectiles shot out from the human ship at speeds approaching light itself. 3 Zathran destroyers disappeared instantly, turned into expanding clouds of superheated gas and twisted metal. The projectiles didn't just pierce their hulls, they erased them from existence. The second salvo followed milliseconds later. This time the human ship targeted the flagship's entire escort wing. 6 heavy cruisers and a dozen fighters simply ceased to exist, vaporized by weapons that shouldn't have fit inside a cargo vessel. "Impossible," Draxvel screamed, all 4 arms frantically working his control panels. "You're merchants. Where did you get military-grade weapons?" A calm voice responded over the communication channels. Lieutenant J. Moon spoke from the human command ship, his tone polite and professional despite the chaos unfolding around them. "We're industrialists, actually. We manufacture everything we need." As he spoke, more weapons emerged from all 3 human ships, point defense systems that swatted incoming missiles like bothersome insects, energy weapons that carved through Zathran armor like paper, including warships disguised as cargo haulers. The battle, if it could be called that, lasted exactly 4 minutes and 17 seconds. The Zathran fleet threw everything they had at the human convoy: missiles, energy beams, projectile weapons, even suicide ramming attacks. Nothing worked. The human ships moved with impossible grace for their size, their weapons systems responding to threats before the Zathran could even target them. One by one, the Zathran vessels were systematically destroyed, not with dramatic explosions or spectacular fires, but with the quiet efficiency of machines built for war. Each ship simply stopped existing when the human weapons touched it. When the shooting stopped, only Draxvel's command ship remained, floating among the debris of his entire fleet. His ship was intact, but its weapons were gone, its engines disabled, its shields down. The human ships had captured him alive with surgical precision. Suddenly, every communication screen in Zathran space flickered to life. Captain Kim's image appeared on every channel, every frequency, every emergency broadcast system throughout the Zathran Empire. Behind him, status displays showed a terrifying truth. Every defensive station was offline, every fleet was reporting no contact, every communication relay was under human control. Captain Kim's face was calm, almost serene. In one hand he held something that made every Zathran who saw it freeze with recognition: a gleaming ceremonial spear, polished to mirror brightness. "Your air is alive but contained," Kim stated, his voice carrying clearly across light years. "Your fleets are scrap metal. Your communications are under our control." He raised the spear slightly, letting the light catch its surface. "But most importantly, our diplomat still hasn't received an apology." The transmission continued, but many Zathran weren't watching anymore. They were looking out their windows where human ships that had been disguised as merchants were now dropping their camouflage, revealing themselves as instruments of war that had been hiding in plain sight all along. The great throne room of the Zathran homeworld was eerily quiet, where once hundreds of courtiers, warriors, and diplomats had gathered to witness Crixvel's displays of power. Now there was only silence. The massive chamber, with its towering columns and gold-inlaid walls depicting Zathran victories, seemed to echo with emptiness. Crixvel knelt in the center of it all, his 4 hands trembling as they held the ceremonial spears. These same weapons had moments ago been symbols of his dominance, stained with the blood of conquered enemies. Now they felt impossibly heavy, like they were made of the densest metal in the universe. His empire was gone, not destroyed, but paused. Every communication system had been taken control of by the humans. His mighty fleets floated dead in space, their crews alive but held in what the humans politely called temporary containment. Even his personal guard, warriors who had sworn to die before leaving his side, had simply walked away when the human soldiers arrived. They hadn't been threatened or forced. They'd just been told their services were no longer needed, and they had left. At every entrance to the throne room, human marines stood perfectly still. They weren't pointing weapons or making threatening gestures. They simply stood there watching, waiting. Their uniforms were simple and practical, their faces calm. Something about their quiet presence was more terrifying than an army with weapons drawn. The air shimmered, and suddenly Captain Kim appeared in the center of the room. It was just a hologram, but the image was so clear and detailed that Crixvel could see the small buttons on the human's uniform, the way his dark hair fell across his forehead, the slight lines around his eyes. "Hello again," Captain Kim said. his voice carrying the same calm politeness it had during their first encounter. "I believe you have something to do." Crixvel looked up, his jaw trembling with a mixture of rage and fear. "First, you killed billions of my people." His voice cracked like glass being shattered. Captain Kim tilted his head slightly. "Actually, no. We disabled your military infrastructure and temporarily relocated your populations to holding areas with full life support, complete medical care and adequate food supplies." His expression didn't change. "They're being treated quite well. You can have them all back." "After what?" Crixvel whispered, already knowing the answer but hoping he was wrong. "After you clean those spears," Kim replied simply. "On every broadcast channel, transmitting to every species in the galaxy, just like you made our diplomat do." Crixvel felt his four hearts hammering against his ribs. "I cannot. The shame would destroy my people's honor." "Your people's honor is intact," Kim stated. "You, however, have a choice to make. The broadcast systems activated without anyone touching them. Across the galaxy, every species received the same transmission feed. In the Great Council chambers, in military command centers, on busy trading stations and quiet agricultural worlds, beings stopped what they were doing to watch. Crixvel, once the mighty ruler of the Zathran Collective, slowly began to clean the ceremonial spears. His movements were careful and precise, just as the human diplomats had been. With each stroke of the cleaning cloth, he quietly spoke the words that were broadcast across the galaxy. "I deeply apologize for my severe lapse in diplomatic protocol." Old Scholar Velmog watched from the Galactic Council chambers, his ancient eyes reflecting a mixture of sadness and fear. Around him, representatives from dozens of species scrambled to their communication panels. Within minutes, formal statements began flooding the networks as species after species withdrew their support for the Zathran, some even offering to mediate between the Zathran and humans. The council moved with unusual speed. A vote was called and passed unanimously within the hour. Humanity would be designated as the official Galactic Peacekeeping Force, with all the authority that title provided. When Crixvel finished cleaning the last spear, Captain Kim stepped forward in the hologram. But now the camera pulled back, showing not just Kim but something far more impressive. Behind him, space itself seemed to shimmer and twist as hundreds of massive human battle stations became visible, dropping some kind of camouflage technology. These weren't newly built facilities. They were clearly old, established installations that had been hiding around strategic systems throughout the galaxy. Some were larger than small moons, bristling with weapons and defenses that made the Zathran fleet look like toys. To clarify our position for all listening, Captain Kim addressed the galaxy directly, his voice carrying across billions of worlds. "We prefer trade, diplomacy, and mutual prosperity. We built our civilization on the principle that violence is the last resort." He smiled then, the same cold smile that had chilled the Galactic Council months ago. "We are very, very good at last resorts." The camera panned slowly across the display of human military might, showing battle stations, hidden fleets, and defensive networks that had been secretly established over decades or perhaps centuries. Captain Kim looked directly into the camera, and somehow it felt like he was looking at each viewer personally. "We don't start wars," he concluded, his voice quiet but carrying absolute certainty. "We end them." Across the galaxy, diplomatic protocols were hastily rewritten. Trade agreements were reviewed with new attention to fairness and respect. Military commanders received new orders emphasizing peaceful resolution over confrontation. The age of humanity, quietly maintaining galactic peace through overwhelming preparation and infinite patience, had begun. And everyone now understood that beneath the humans' polite smiles and patient diplomacy lay something far more dangerous than any conventional military force, a species that could wait, prepare, and when finally pushed, end conflicts with surgical precision that left no doubt about the outcome.